The boardroom battles at PPC and HCI, amongst others, have intrigued and fascinated us in recent weeks. Many of us wished we could have been a fly on the wall as they played out, or maybe we're just not brave enough to witness that level of, I don't know, juvenile delinquency in the boardroom. This is Tonight. I'm Bruce Whitfield, and tonight I speak to someone who's often been in these boardrooms, some of them that have been in the news in recent weeks, but he's not on those boards anymore, which is disappointing, so he can't give us an update on exactly what's going on. But non-executive director and independent chairman of Steinhoff and Exxaro, Len Konar, giving us a sneak view as to what goes on behind closed doors. I mean, Len Konar, when you look at what has played out in the boardroom of SAA, which you have served on until I think 2003 or thereabouts, with the CEO being suspended, Monwabisi Kalawe getting suspended by the chairperson but not the board, and then being instructed to reinstate him. We don't know what's happened there. And then the boards of PPC and HCI, it's turmoil in the boardroom.
To a degree, yes. But I think what we need to recognize quite clearly is the composition of the board and what the role of the board is. So very simply put, the role of the board is to appoint the CEO and to look at the strategy of the entity, and a strategy that is developed and approved over the long term.
But so who defines the strategy? Is it the chief executive and their executives who go to the board and say, this is what we'd like to do? The board, with its wisdom of years of experience around the table, goes, that's a good idea, that's a bad idea, refines the strategy, gives it back to the executives and say, run with it.
To a degree, yes. The management normally develops the strategy and brings it to the board, and it's refined. So the board normally is representative of a wide range of skills, and the board would ask particularly pertinent questions from a competitive point of view, that you want to stick to what you are good at from a knitting point of view, or do you want to change the strategy? Can we tweak this? Have you considered that? What are your competitors doing? So the role of the board is to interrogate the strategy that management develops and to have management go back, refine it, so that you could put building blocks in place as well as attach numbers for the next 5 to 7 years.
And then the relationship between the board and the chief executive, because chief executives can build themselves up to be the lords of all they survey as they become chief executives of companies. There's got to be a check and a balance over the CEO, isn't there?
Absolutely. And many of the boards that I serve on, Bruce, we have a tendency that after each board meeting, the non-executive directors meet with the chief executive officer and give him a briefing on how the proceedings of the board meeting have transpired for that particular day. And then we excuse the CEO and we have an in-committee meeting of just the non-executive directors. And thereafter, I as the chair will meet one-on-one on the CEO and share with the CEO if there are any concerns, or what is being done well, or what should we be tweaking, and so on. So it's a positive relationship that needs to be developed, and that's on an ongoing basis. On many of the boards that I am associated with, at the conclusion of each meeting, we have an in-committee session with the CEO and CFO, we excuse them, and then the non-executive directors, and in some cases, just the independent directors meet, where we have majority shareholders sitting on the board, and we wish to discuss things so that we could go back to the majority shaeraholder as well.
Does that iron out lots of the creases and the wrinkles, which are inevitably amongst clever, powerful, influential people? Conflicts must arise.
Bruce, in theory, yes, but it's very important for the chair to have a positive relationship with the CEO. So myself, I meet on a regular basis with the CEO of Exxaro as well as the CEO of Steinhoff, and we exchange what are the developments. And as far as Steinhoff is concerned, where I'm the independent chair, I also participate in the EXCO meetings as an observer. So I know exactly what the strategy is, what's coming to future board meetings, and I can provide tactical guidance as far as the strategy is concerned.
Have you ever sat on a board where the relationship between the board and the chief executive deteriorated to such a point where people couldn't work together anymore?
I did. I've exited a number of boards over the last 15 years where I find that there is dysfunctionality. And you've got to ask yourself, you've got to exhaust it from a governance point of view, and you've got to ask yourself whether or not you staying on that particular board will be a positive or a negative.
Which ones?
I am unfortunately constrained by non-disclosure agreements. Some of them are listed, and therefore one is constrained from referring to them in public.
Okay, now that's really important, because what we've seen happen over the last couple of weeks is these spats go public, because many of these issues, I wouldn't know which boards you've left as a result of those tensions where you thought you couldn't make a constructive contribution anymore, because there is a code by which directors behave. Yet PPC and HCI in particular have erupted into the public domain. Is that unseemly or is it good?
It's got positives and negatives. Let's unpack each of them. If one looks at HCI, you've got an executive chair. Now, in terms of good governance, one should have an independent chair, because the chair will monitor the strategy and the delivery as far as the CEO is concerned. But both Johnny Copeland and Marcel Golding are people that I am friendly with, so I know the individuals.
And
but if you look
they're
at
both tough, single-minded individuals.
they're both high achievers.
Yeah.
But if you look at the value that's been created at HCI of 18 billion over the past 15 years, and the transaction that Marcel Golding entered into as far as Ellie's is concerned, which was 24 million. So in the big scheme of things, it's not material, and one could have discussed that indoors. But Bruce, you need to contextualize this particular transaction in looking at the strategy. If you are looking at a strategy and you're going into set-top boxes, it's long-term. And even though the money might appear immaterial, one needs to have an understanding and support of the entire board that this is the route that we need to go in future.
And in most situations, that conversation could have been had, and could have been had in
committee,
a robust and lively discussion.
And one could have disposed of those shares, but strategy is owned by the board.
Yes.
And therefore, one...
But where executives and the board and the founders and everybody's intricately linked, it becomes that much more complicated, doesn't it?
It does, but one could sit in the boardroom and one could certainly discuss the matter.
But as with all the open letters that we've seen from the likes of John Copeland himself and from Marcel Golding and from Bronwyn Keane-Young, it shows that there's been a deterioration in those personal relationships.
There has been a deterioration in the relationship, and that's where an independent non-executive chairman or lead independent director would be able to mend those broken fences over a period of time.
So they had a structural issue in their boardroom.
And a size issue. You need to look at the size and the skill set on the board. And
PPC?
PPC, you've got a new CEO that's come on board who's promoting a particular strategy, and one could have managed that well internally. There were a number of executives that have exited the organization. There appears to be a breakdown in the relationship between the CEO and one of the executives, and one could have managed that internally over a period of time in a more sensitive manner, and it wouldn't have attracted the degree of publicity that it has. But also the board could have been strengthened. If the CEO felt that there were particular skill set that were missing on the board, how can we supplement that? How can we retire? So that conversation is dealt with internally with a supportive chair with an understanding of appropriate governance.
But I mean, I spoke to the chairman the other day who said, here's Ketso Gordon, who doesn't understand how public companies work. He's worked, listed companies worked, he's worked in the public sector. And my immediate thought was, hold on, Mr. Chairman, but you appointed this guy who you say has no clue how to run a listed company. The board has got to take some accountability for the way in which it's managed the process of hiring and the management of the management.
Bruce, that's the conversation that I have on a regular basis with my CEOs at the companies that I chair. And the role of the chair is to mentor and to share experiences and sometimes to guide and to bring the CEO on board where there are excesses that you need to control. So it's absolutely imperative that you have a chair that has conversations with the CEOs on an ongoing basis. So the companies that I chair, I have this relationship, an open line that I can phone the CEO and discuss with the CEO particular transactions or particular activities that are taking place.
Is it okay for the CEO and the chairman to fight?
I think one needs a robust engagement, and you need to argue, because it's through dissension that you come up with superb decisions.
But it's about managing.
It's the manner in which the fight takes place. So without becoming personal, it's got to be constructive.
I mean, the public sector, you've worked on public sector boards, correct me if I'm wrong, but the SAA, ESCOM and the SABC, 3 boards that are in the spotlight right now for the total mismanagement of public assets. I mean, how badly have those boards gone wrong? Were they a mess when you were there?
No, they were in order in the days that I was there some 10 years ago.
So what's gone wrong?
You've got the Public Finance Management Act that requires a particular approach, and each of these entities, Bruce, does have their own founding legislation. So we've got the Companies Act, we've got the Public Finance Management Act, and you've got ministries that are making appointments. And one needs to look at the skill set that resides on those particular boards. So for an airline, you need 2 or 3 people sitting on that board that have served on Ryanair or JetBlue that could bring that particular experience onto the board of SAA. And that, unfortunately, in the most recent series of resignations, wasn't represented on the board. You had some very competent, very bright chartered accountants, lawyers on the board, but you need industry experience to understand routes and to understand bums on seats and what the returns are and what the wide-bodied fleet is.
The airline industry is one of the most complicated and capital-intensive in the world, yet we're pouring money into a bottomless pit. There's no doubt that the state will have to bail out SAA again. It will have to bail out the SABC again. It'll have to bail out Eskom again. And if we throw the post office into the mix, the cronyism that has beset these boards over the last decade or so is coming back to bite us.
To a degree, but you hope that there'll be a self-regulating mechanism with the decisiveness that the new Minister of Public Enterprises has brought to SAA in finding...
But her hands are tied. I mean, it looks like her hands are tied. Here you've got Len Brown, who sort of shrugs her shoulders at a question as to how can you put Dudu Myeni back as the as the chairperson. I forget the exact quote, but it's something like, well, better the devil you know. Along those lines, that was the sentiment expressed.
Even with the current composition, you can supplement that board with industry experience, and you've got to make corporate governance your overriding mantra.
But whose corporate governance? The King Code, the Public Finance Management Act, the Companies Act. Isn't there too much noise around this?
I disagree. The King Code is a wonderful document, and it shares with you best practice. As a board member, you need to understand your fiduciary duties. You need to perform your duties with skill and diligence, and you need to work in the best interests of the entity. So conflicts of interest must be left outside the boardroom door.
So if you were advising Len Brown, what would you be telling her? Eskom and at SAA?
One would share with her that she needs to populate the board with a range of expertise, including industry-specific expertise. One needs very, very good executive management from a finance point of view, because these are drawing cash, so that they need to understand then from a governance and reporting point of view. And you need a chair, in my humble view, Bruce, at these entities that would be like a bank chair that would be spending 2 to 3 days a week in understanding and supporting and motivating the CEOs of these organizations.
In the real world, however, is that a prospect that we will see in the next 5 years?
It is possible. It is possible.
It's necessary.
It's a question of give and take. And the point that is raised from time to time, can egos accommodate that? So one needs to understand, who's the elephant in the room. So one needs to understand and accommodate that.
Len Konar, for your expertise, thank you very much. Len Konar is one of the most experienced executive and non-executive directors of JSE-listed companies. He's the independent chairman of Steinhoff and Exxaro, amongst other companies as well. That's Len Konar. Thank you for watching. There'll be more boardroom battles, no doubt, in the next couple of weeks, hopefully even tomorrow. There's always a fight to be had. Good night and goodbye.